Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. My name is Nicola. I'm a project lead here at Radix. I'm very happy to be leading today's digital session together with Thibaut.
Hi, everyone.
Who'll be sharing some great insights as a data science team lead at Brussels Airport Company. So hi, Thibaut. So first, who are we? We are Radix. We're a Belgium-based artificial intelligence agency with offices in Brussels and in Ghent. And we help ambitious companies design, develop, and scale high-impact AI solutions. And we're really about empowering people with AI to do their best and most creative work and equip them with insights to make better decisions. How we do that? We do that in three ways. We help them discover AI opportunities. We deliver AI solutions, but we also advise in-house AI teams. So here are some of the clients that we've worked with over the years. So thank you for attending today. We'll try to make this session as valuable as possible. It's going to be packed with practical insights about how organizations can successfully put AI into production after doing a proof of concept. But first, some webinar housekeeping with Julia.
In order to make this webinar more comfortable for everybody, first, we are all muted while Nicolas and Thibaut are giving the presentation, but you can indicate any questions that you have in the chat. And then when the Q&A session starts, we will unmute you all so you can also ask the questions in person. Next, you will also see some polls coming up on the screen or the information that you can download. For example, we're going to be sharing blogs and case studies. So make sure to go to polls or handouts section that is right near your chat on top right. And also you will receive a recording of today's digital session. So if you want to share it with anybody, you will be able to do so. That's it for practicalities. Thanks, Nico.
Yes, thank you, Julia. So in today's session, Thibaut and I will be sharing what it means to deploy AI-powered applications successfully. What are the common challenges that organizations face? And then we'll provide you with a roadmap, some key practices that you can adopt to overcome some of the challenges that you may face with a real-life use case. And then we'll foresee a Q&A moment at the end where we can answer any questions or bounce off any ideas you may have. So if you wonder why we share this today, it's because we've noticed through our conversations with clients, with leads, that taking pilot projects to production remains a key challenge for large organizations. So a proof of concept is really just a proof of value. You do it primarily to learn fast and to learn cheaply, to see if there's potential value in a particular technology for a particular use case. But while proof of concepts make you appear innovative, the value is really in productionized AI. And it's even productionized AI at scale that will give you a true competitive edge. A predictive model that sits on your data scientist laptop in some Jupyter notebook won't do much for you. You need to expose it to real-life end users to be able to say something meaningful about the impact of AI. With our approach at Radix, we aim to minimize that risk, the risk of getting stuck in a proof of concept phase. We like to call it the skateboard approach, which essentially means doing the smallest thing possible that adds value and then shipping it as fast as possible to gather some user feedback. So we typically start with simple techniques, simple models to create a baseline, reach the end user fast, and then we'll further fine tune and customize to the specific needs and requirements. At Radix, that approach led us to have 60% of our solutions having reached a production stage against a somewhat lower average that is being reported in the industry. And one such example is the Atlas Copco case. So Atlas Copco is mostly known for its air compressors. So it's a very large industrial manufacturing group. And our model there is deployed and currently helping production planners in spending 92% less of their time in the task of planning and communicating expected delivery times, which ultimately has helped them improve orders on time by 9%. Another example is the BTech case that we're going to use today. I think Thibaut will jump in here to explain some of the work that we did there.
Sure. So we are going to use BTech as the example for today's webinar. If you could, yes, indeed. So BTech is a product that we at Brussels Airport designed together with Radix. It contains an AI component. That's also why we have chosen Brussels Airport to do it together with Radix. It's a tag that you can attach to your luggage as a passenger. And when you arrive at Brussels Airport and your plane lands, you get notifications of where your bag exactly is, and you get a prediction of when your bag will be available for pickup in the reclaim area. You get a message like your luggage will be available for pickup at bell number 3, for example, from 10:35 onwards, and it's X minutes walking from where you are at the moment. And the vision behind that is that we want passengers to take their time before their luggage. So avoiding passengers to rush to the reclaim area and then just standing there and waiting for the luggage. They can use their time better by, for example, drinking a coffee or relaxing a bit or doing some shopping. The overall goal was increased customer experience, and that's also what we actually obtained with this product. We did a survey after the launch of the BTech product. 92% of the passengers rated the service as useful, and 1/3 of the passengers even adapted their behavior to the prediction that was delivered to them. So they actually changed their plan by taking their time before they rush to the reclaim area. So that's the example that we will use in this webinar, Nico.
Thank you, Thibaut. So where do you stand today? It's important to know, so for today's session, we assume that you are here in the life cycle of your project. You completed a proof of concept by having done some or hopefully all of the following things. You defined a clear value proposition, a clear business case. You've defined the boundaries of your problem, the scope. You've defined the KPIs, the success metrics that matter. Some companies also want to see a feasibility study before they actually write a single line of code on the data, on the infrastructure, on the technology. But also importantly, validate some of the initial assumptions and hypotheses that they had while writing the business case. And then ultimately you developed what we call a skateboard, which is a low fidelity version 0 of your solution that hopefully generated some early results, early end user feedback, and also some enthusiasm and excitement from the business to move forward. So that's great. And the next logical step would be to go to production. With that, however, arise all sorts of new challenges for organizations, both people and technical. So what are common hurdles that organizations face? First, what does it even mean going to production? So essentially it means exposing the application to real life users using real life data to solve real life problems. At Radix, we always encourage our clients to go to production as fast as possible. Sometimes even after just a single sprint. But the truth is, it's not always possible for various reasons. It can be the critical nature of the process you're targeting, the complexity of ICT integration, or maybe just risk aversion from clients who don't want to show something to their consumers, their customers, that is not perfect yet. So in the context of AI, there are different elements of risks to account for in productionizing process. The reason for that being is that traditional software development depends mostly on code. while machine learning depends both on code and the data. And as Thibaut pointed out to me earlier, it's not always clear why the AI component makes a specific mistake or produces a certain number. And so that always adds an additional level, additional layer of uncertainty that is new to end users and that they must learn to cope with. So what are hurdles organizations face? So there's more hurdles than these, of course. We're just highlighting those that we have observed the most in our clients. Managing the expectations, foreseeing the different reality of a production environment, and then organizing for change. So starting with the expectations. So from a business standpoint, managing expectations and gaining the buy-in is still very much a hurdle in the sense that AI and machine learning are probabilistic models. They're based on statistical methods and they're far from being perfect. Sometimes they'll make mistakes. And because of that, clients may be reluctant to move to production. It could be because there's a high cost associated to being wrong, or they're just being uncomfortable being wrong. So I think their data science and AI teams have a strong role to play in translating what AI means, the benefits, the limitations, especially when it comes to edge cases, and also diffusing realistic expectations, explaining that fine-tuning models takes time and experimentation. What I also see is setting up a proof concept is relatively easy and cheap to do. And that kind of sets the wrong expectations as to how easy you can actually make it operational. Some people tend to underestimate that. Thibaut, can you tell us a little bit about your experience at BAC on this front?
Sure. So for the BTech product, of course, the most important stakeholders are the passengers. And we can all assume that the passengers are not used to handle AI outputs. Most of them haven't even heard about artificial intelligence before. And as you pointed out, Nico, AI makes mistakes, and mistakes that we sometimes cannot explain. That's just part of the job. And that's also something that we experienced with this BTech product. At one point, the AI model in that product predicted for a passenger, your luggage will be there within 1 hour, which was clearly wrong because that's too long. And it's important that in those cases, we don't lose the passenger's trust in our product because it's still a great product and it's still very accurate 99% of the time. But if this 1% of the time it gives a very wrong output, we might lose the trust of passengers in the product. And for that reason, we added an extra layer of business logic on top of the AI model's output. For example, a small thing that we did is that we put a maximum on the output of 40 minutes so that passengers do not get this extremely high output anymore in this 1% of the time that the AI model makes a mistake.
Okay, thank you, Thibaut. Now, the second hurdle from a more technical standpoint is foreseeing the different reality of the production environment. And that reality can be different in many aspects, data, infrastructure, security, and compliance. So when you're in a proof of concept, you're in a controlled setting, right? It's like you operate in a vacuum. Mistakes are contained, there's no pressure of uptime, results are not impacting people in real workflows yet. So the closer you get to the final release of your AI application, the more you integrate it, the more likely proof concepts start to break down. When it comes to the data going to production, you no longer work with static sample data, but with real life data, and also a lot more of it. So your data may not look exactly the same over time, and it may change over time, which we call data drift, which can affect performance, of course. There's also a hurdle of access to high quality data if the data is siloed. So if your proof of concept is based on a limited data set, initial data set, and you'd like to take the performance to the next level by using a lot more data, that is sometimes a major blocker or source of effort for teams. Infrastructure-wise, well, many legacy systems and organizations have been built years ago, sometimes even decades ago for some industries, and don't always offer this modular microservices approach that allows you to easily extend functionality with a certain AI components. In terms of security and compliance, are you actually allowed to use the data for your machine learning model? Once you go into production, that can also be a blocker. Is the company actually owner of that data? Does it comply with GDPR laws, etc.? Thibaut, what did you experience at Brussels Airport when it comes to this?
Well, this different reality of a production phase is exactly also what we experienced when moving from proof of concept to production with BTech. In BTech, a prediction is made on the moment that the flight is landed and has ended the docking procedure. And once we move to production, what we noticed is that some of the data that is needed to make that prediction of when your bags will be available, some of that data is not available at the time of prediction. That's not a disaster, but we need to design the AI model so that it can still function properly in that situation, so that it can still function without certain data being available, or can even fall back to a default prediction when none of the data is available for some reason.
Yeah. Okay, very interesting. And then there's a third hurdle, which is organizing for change. So successful AI across and throughout the organization relies on the adaptability of both your people and processes. There will always be fears and misconceptions about AI in the workforce, which may undermine their willingness to embrace the technology, to adapt and to experiment. And the key for adoption is to educate and communicate extensively about it. But the same argument is valid for rigid internal processes when it comes to redesigning human plus AI workflows, which for some industries are harder to get rid of, sometimes for good reasons, such as strong security protocols, regulation, etc. So how does Brussels Airport prepare and organize for change, Thibaut?
For us, it was also new. So we had IT specialists who know the infrastructure at Brussels Airport very well, but who were absolutely no experts in AI and have not worked with AI models before. And then on the other hand, we had the AI experts, the data scientists, who made the model, but who did not have any experience with running a product and maintaining that product and doing change requests and so on. So there was also a change that we had to make. I needed to make a hybrid team with these experts from different teams and different departments to come together to maintain the machine learning product in production. They're also new for Brussels Airport to bring these people together in squads and design procedures to handle change requests and have all teams dedicate a certain capacity of their team to it.
Okay, interesting. So now we've just discussed some of the hurdles that we face, that Thibaut is also facing at Brussels Airport Company. I'd like to present you something tangible that you can take away from this session, which is a roadmap of best practices that you can use for your next proof of concept. And to me, it's all about anticipating the roadblocks ahead. So a roadmap consists of 5 big elements. The first one being crafting a change management strategy, defining the decisions and the actions that you're going to take and the answers and the questions that you want answered. 3, engaging the key stakeholders and setting up a plan. And 4, partnering with a cloud provider platform. And then 5, planning for continuous support and maintenance. So we'll now dive into each single one of those. Change management. So what we typically do is try to assess, especially in very large AI transformations, at least, to assess which individual users and teams will be affected by the implementation of the AI system. So try to use our empathy to understand how AI will impact people's work, people's decisions, but also people's feelings. At the end of the day, we're dealing with people, so we need to deal with care. So for the direct end users, who are they? Do they have sufficient training, sufficient skills to work with an AI application? But also importantly, do they understand it? Do they trust it? That's very key. So we push for their buy-in as early as possible. What works well is to have some kind of a champion user, like a user ambassador who will represent the end user and be continuously involved in all discussions around the solution. What also works well is to be very hands-on through demos and tutorials, explain the benefits, walk them through the entire new process, explaining the impact. We recommend to be very hands-on instead of expecting other teams or even the direct end user to read a solution design document. Because humans are intimidated by change, so make it less so. In my experience, budget for change management always comes last and even gets canceled because not always considered to be the most important thing in a project. But also other impacted teams and individuals who are not your direct end users. How do they collaborate when a process is automated? While previously it was a person, what if it's a machine now doing the job? How does it flag errors? How does it ask questions? Who's liable for errors? So those are details, but important details to get it right. Secondly, defining the downstream decisions and action. So in the first point, I'm focusing on people. Here I'm focusing on the process and the integrated approach that AI will have once you're in a production environment. We notice in client conversations that when solutions or ideas coming from the top, there is not always a lot of effort or thought put into how the model will actually need to be consumed. So we recommend think about the decisions and the action that need to be taken as your starting point. This is actually where we always start from, because it's the answer you want that matters. And based on that, we try to map the right techniques, the right architecture to be able to answer that question. In the case of bTag, being able to have a prediction 1 hour in advance, for instance, may be important. We need to take that into account in the solution architecture. Will it be, for instance, a human in the loop type of process, requiring a human to either review or transform the output? Or will it be completely automated? Those are important questions. Also, how is the human going to interact with the output of the model? Is it going to be a separate interface, an integrated interface, etc.? And also think about the workflows themselves. To which extent can existing workflows be amended to accommodate the new AI functionality?
Okay, so the third one that we want to put on the roadmap is engage the key stakeholders and set up a plan. So let there be no doubt about that. AI is always a team effort. So you have the machine learning engineers, the data scientists, and the data engineers. We also need to bring other people around the table. The business owners who know the process where the AI product will be used. Product specialists. In our case at Brussels Airport, for example, experts in passenger behavior, who know exactly what passenger wants and how passengers respond to certain messages and certain things. It is important to get all these people around the table and to involve them. So setting up a plan that effectively involves all those stakeholders is very important. And topics that can be discussed there is the integration of the AI product or the AI model in existing infrastructure, because it's not always desirable for companies to have the machine learning product as a standalone thing. Most companies want to integrate it in existing infrastructure. So the IT experts of the company itself are very important there. And many other topics that need to be discussed with the right stakeholders and involve them. Point number 4 on our roadmap, quite an interesting one, is partner up with a cloud provider. You can have the choice to run your machine learning model on premise, but we advise to go for a cloud provider because that has several advantages. Most of the cloud providers have built-in toolboxes that allow you to quickly design a first machine learning model in the POC phase and see how people respond to it, or how it can be used in the process that you want to play on. A second important advantage is the scalable computing resources. Also for BTech, that was a very important advantage. When suddenly more passengers buy BTechs, the machine learning model needs to work harder, it needs to make more predictions. If you make use of a cloud provider, that's actually not a problem, because when more computational resources are needed, they are given to that machine learning model. A third advantage is linked to that, and that's the cost efficiency. You only pay for the resources that you effectively use. If tomorrow no passengers buy BTechs anymore, then we will not pay for the computational resources to run the machine learning model, because they are not being used. What we like the most about Radix is that they are cloud agnostic, but they are certified partners with Amazon AWS and Microsoft Azure. And that selection of cloud provider, we did that very carefully, taking into account, of course, the pricing model, but also the customizing, deploying, and opportunities to monitor machine learning solutions in production. And of course, need to comply with our company's policies, for example, concerning security. Those are all things that we took into account by having our choice of cloud provider. And then we have the last point on our roadmap: plan for continuous support and maintenance. Because yes, the power of artificial intelligence is in the fact that it is capable of adapting to new situations. But it also means that this AI model needs maintenance. We need to retrain a model on the newest data, on the most recent data. So we need to make a decision on how frequent are we going to retrain that AI model. Are we going to do that real time, on a daily basis, on a monthly basis? That's a decision that we need to make. Also, how are we going to process bug fixing, or how are we going to redesign to new situations? And very at hand now, because now we are in a post-COVID situation at the airport. The situation is very different from before the COVID period. So there we also had to redesign lots of our machine learning models so that they work accurately again in this new situation. So we need to have a machine learning operations strategy, which contains, for example, evaluation and monitoring the model's performance. Are the metrics still as they should be? Making sure that the model runs accurately and smoothly, but also having a strategy on how to continuously capture the data that we need to adapt our AI model to the most recent data, and have a dedicated team that does all that maintenance. And as we talked about before, that might be an organizational change for most companies, bringing experts from very different teams and very different departments together, IT specialists, but business users, other experts, bring them around the table to plan this continuous support and maintenance. And there I would like to close down the roadmap by a short recap of the 5 points that we discussed. So Nico started by talking about the change management strategy. Then we got to define downstream decisions and actions, engaging the key stakeholders and setting up a plan to involve all of them, bring them around the table, partner with the cloud provider, which is a very interesting one to consider. And of course, very important, plan for continuous support and maintenance, because machine learning and artificial intelligence in general only works because, and only can show its true power because it is capable of adapting to new data and new situations.
All right. Thank you, Thibaut. I think this concludes our presentation. We're now open for questions from the audience. Feel free to post yours in the chat. If you're interested to know more as well, we'll provide you with the links to our case studies and articles, also present in the slide, and we'll share the recording with you. So yeah, open for questions.
I see a first question in the chat, Nico, from Johan. So maybe we can start with that one. Question there is, how long took it from POC proven value to go live, to go into production for our cases. I can answer that from my point of view. For the specific case of BTech, it took, of course, several months mainly because it was the first time that we went into production with an AI model. Where we do that now for new models, it takes several weeks, so that time is quickly reduced. But maybe Nico, you can answer from a more general point of view.
Yeah. On average, when it comes to Radix projects, we typically deliver a proof of concept in 1 or 2 sprints. So that will be ranging from 2 to 4 weeks with very minimal integration. And then we're looking to 4 to 6 weeks for something to go to production. And of course, it always depends a bit on the complexity of the integration. But those are the timelines that we're typically looking at. I also see that the answers to the poll, the majority answered that foreseeing the different reality of production is a hurdle. I'll be curious if those that answered this would like to elaborate in the chat or have further questions there, see if we can help.
You're all now unmuted and you can turn your camera on as well and ask the question here. And there's a question from Salman. So how did you define the budget and made sure the budget was not exceeded? Because AI is very unpredictable and it's difficult to scope, and especially to keep the budget within the boundaries.
Yeah. Do you want to answer this first from your perspective at Brussels Airport, Thibaut?
Yes. So the strategy that is also followed by Radix and all other cases also followed here. It's the agile approach. So you start with a simpler model, and then sprint by sprint you improve it and you bring it closer to where you actually want to go. And in that way, it also allows us as a company to say, okay, we stop at this point. The model is working good enough. Let's put this in production and work with that. And maybe we can schedule future improvements on a later time when we see that the product is actually captured by passengers and passengers actually start using it. And also has the advantage that in production you learn more. You learn from the feedback that you get from passengers, which allow you to better plan future improvements on your AI model. So in that way, we have the advantage of getting feedback, and we keep the budget within limits.
Yeah, and just to add to that as well, to your question, Salman, is what we advocate is to do some kind of feasibility check also. So we'll try to build something as minimal as possible with as little effort as possible to try to validate whether there's a problem solution fit, and really minimizing the risk for the client that we start building something that is either not solving the problem or that is going to appear a lot more complex than we anticipated. There's another question from Patrick. My experience with AI is that it takes training and evaluation also after deployment. How does this change the business case in your experience? That's a very valid point. Do you want to say something about that, Thibaut?
Yes, indeed. Even after deployment, the monitoring of the performance of the AI model is very important. We need to keep a constant track of all the metrics that we want to hit to reach a certain level. Are these levels still reached? Does this change the business case? Well, for most cases now it does change, because we're now in a strange period. We have the pre-corona period and the post-corona period. So yes, that does change the business case, and we need to adapt to that new situation, which means that for some of the models that we have made, we are now going back to a POC phase and redesign the model, prove again the business value, and go to production with a new model.
So that means then, Thibaut, that we're continuously reevaluating then the business case.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Hope this answers your question, Patrick. There are other questions from the audience? Welcome. So maybe while we're waiting for other questions in the chat, I saw also there was a question from the participants on how to make a strong business case for AI. Obviously, defining the value proposition, the business case is really key, and actually the very starting point of your journey with AI. So there's two ways you can approach it. There's a bottom up and top down approach. So, but typically how we would approach it with our clients, that we would start from the strategic value drivers of the organization. So what are the main priorities? Is it creating revenue growth, diversifying revenue streams, cutting down on operational costs, etc. And then we try to identify which are the most important elements that drive this value driver. What are the KPIs, the key performance indicators that these consist of? So to give you an example, if you're a healthcare and pharmaceutical company and you're interested to decrease throughput time in R&D engineering efforts, for example, what you can do is reduce long vaccine development cycles. That would be your KPI. What we would do is try to break down what that means. Why is it such a long vaccine development cycle? Well, it has to do with the cost and the speed of performing a trial experiment. It's the long time to FDA approval rate. It's the high clinical trial field. And then we try to identify concrete use cases for AI that can help improve the KPIs over which you as a company can exert the most control over. And I think that's very crucial because some of the things are not always in your control. Maybe the technology is immature, or you're relying on external companies, providers, suppliers over which you don't have control over. So you try to identify which components, let's say in your formula, you have most control over. And there you target it with AI. And then you start by finding those tasks that are repetitive, mundane, so the low-hanging fruit, and yes, and then also something that came up in our experience with our clients is that to a business case, there's a business case for the AI and the non-AI. So AI is often just a fraction of the code base, right? It's a fraction of the entire functionality, and the BTech case is a very good example of that. So you need to measure the impact holistically, not just look at the AI, but at the overall package. And then finally, it's important that everyone is aligned, of course, on the problem statement and the value creation, which you will continuously refine, and therefore it is clearly the case.
We have 3 more questions. First one is from Christine. What makes a good champion user for an AI project? Nico.
Yeah, that's a good one. So I've had the chance to work with a champion user. So that's typically someone who's very quickly on board, who's a bit more tech savvy, but also just enthusiastic to work with new technologies, trying something new, always trying to find ways to improve the work of him or herself or his team. So always on the lookout, enthusiastic, open-minded to try something new. So that's what we're typically looking for in a good champion user.
Next one is from Adriaan. Do you take ethics into account when deploying an AI-based service, depending on the type of service? If so, how would you take into account ethics?
Yeah, so ethics, so bias and fairness is indeed a very big topic when it comes to machine learning. We actually did a webinar about 2 months ago on the topic, so I recommend you to have a look at it. It was very interesting. Was conducted by one of my colleagues who's expert in bias and fairness. We'll be sharing the link to the webinar as well. We have designed, an ethics framework with a number of steps that we typically follow. And it is really assessed on an individual basis from use case to use case. So I wouldn't be able, in honesty, I wouldn't be able to give you all of the different points in that framework. But if you're interested, we can definitely come back to you on that and elaborate further. Adrian, if that's okay with you. Okay, cool.
And there is another one from Salman. Do you do some kind of hypothesis testing even before you go to POC modeling, after you have identified a potential case? I can answer that for Brussels Airport. We indeed have a phase before the POC modeling, which we call here a feasibility study. And it goes about, do we have the right data, or do we need to collect new data, but also about which hypothesis are we starting from, and does that hypothesis hold? And when we go about passenger products, we have lots of information from surveys that are taken with our passengers, where we can create a general idea of would this product be beneficial for passengers, and how would they respond to it, and so on. So yes, we do hypothesis testing.
Thank you, Thibaut. Also, just to add up to Salman's last question, I think there's also very creative ways that you can inspire yourself on how to validate something with as little effort and as code as possible. Sometimes even with a dummy solution could really do the trick with simple rules, and just try to probe the reactions from your end users. How does it actually solve the problem? Does it answer a specific need? So you can really get creative there, I think.
I see Julia is also sharing the fairness blog post and the fairness webinar in the chat. So people who are interested in that can find the link over there.
So we're taking more questions. Oh, good here. All right. I also saw that some of the participants were interested to know more about MLOps specifically, or AI ops. That's interesting to know. If there's demand for it, we can definitely look to see if we can plan a separate webinar to discuss that topic at length. So if there's interest, definitely give us a shout, and we'll see if we can make it happen. So we have a question, Thibaut, from Andy. How do you keep track of possible diversity of tools when you do different proof of concepts?
Diversity of tools. Maybe Andy can elaborate more on that question. What do you actually would like to know?
Open up my microphone. Just wondering, yeah, typically if you want to keep good governance of all the tools that you use, if one uses Databricks, another one uses just like the same Python, somebody else comes with R. If you do a lot of stuff, you can have very broad diversity of languages to maintain runs of production. What's your view on that? Because that's one of the hurdle blocks in our company, I think. That's if you do something with Python, it's not a default tool for, or it's not recognized by the company as a default tool. Can put a POC in production, but it's still in POC phase because there's no maintenance shell around it. Because it's, and if you have 10 tools like that, then yeah, because this data science is evolving all the time, difficult to keep track with a small team.
Okay, so the sound quality was not great, but I understood especially the last part of your question. So indeed, the first times that we went from POC to production stage, there was some mismatch between the tools that were used in the POC phase and what you can actually use in a production phase. So some of the code needed to be somehow rewritten, making use of other toolboxes in Python, for example. But now the two teams, the specialist in productionizing and the specialists in doing POCs, have talked to each other so many times and have worked together so many times that actually in the POC phase, we are already preparing for the production phase. So we make sure that we use the right tools in the POC phase. And we make sure that we build things that with minimal efforts can move to production. I don't know if that answers your question, Andy.
Was that a yes? We couldn't hear you, Andy. Okay.
Okay.
No worries, Andy. So if there, well, let's give maybe some room for one last question, if there's any. Otherwise, we can wrap up so you can all be nice on time for your next meeting.
Good question from Adrian. Let's take that one as the last one, Nico. Have you ever encountered fear for AI from the personal? I can answer that from my position. Some background: I was the first data scientist at Brussels Airport at all when I started here 3 years ago. Was there fear for AI from the personal? Definitely yes. The rumor was going around that a data scientist was noticed on the floor, and everybody had questions about what I was going to do. Some people actually came and talked to me and asked, "Are you going to replace my job by a computer algorithm?" So this is something that definitely needs to be taken serious when starting to do AI and data science in your companies. The solution to that, it's one simple word, is communication. It's explaining over and over again to everybody who has worries that AI is not a replacement for a job, but a support for a job. That's one thing. And the second thing is that experts on the floor of the company are highly needed to create AI models that work with high accuracy. An AI model cannot learn everything, and expert knowledge is very highly required to make good working AI products and AI models.
Thank you, Thibaut. That's a great answer. And just also to add up to that, I think trust and is intimately linked with explainability. And so how we try to tackle that at Radix is not just to combine AI and data science, but also with great product design. Really putting something in the hands of an end user that they can trust, that they can understand, and really collaborate together with an AI. So often we've seen that our solutions have taken the form of AI assistants that are there to empower them rather than to replace them. And so it's all about, like Thibaut said, communication, and second, involving them from day one and explaining them carefully and with patience. All right, then I think that we can wrap up. I want to thank you, Thibaut, for your presence today. It was very interesting.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, the audience, as well, for participating to this session. I hope you'll be taking away a number of interesting insights for your next AI initiatives. We invite you to read up on resources on our blog that we'll be sharing. And if you'd like to talk to us, I think every participant will have the chance to book a free one-on-one with one of our experts to understand how they can get started with AI or take their proof of concept to the next level. So thank you, everyone. Take care.